The wine glass shattered against pristine white linen. Not dropped, thrown. The nanny stumbled backward, her crisp uniform splattered red, her voice breaking. That child is possessed. I won't. She fled past armed guards in tailored suits, past marble fountains and manicured hedges, leaving only one truth behind. Another caretaker had failed. At the center of the garden party, surrounded by crystal and wealth and dangerous men in designer shoes, sat 9-year-old Jiwoo Kong. Pink silk dress. Perfectly still. Eyes tracking everything, revealing nothing. The Korean Mafia boss's daughter, who hadn't spoken in 2 years, not since the night her mother's screams stopped forever. But her hands were moving. Small. Frantic. Desperate shapes no one else could read. 12 nannies. 2 years. One impossible child. Until the black maid saw what everyone else missed. The Kong estate doesn't appear on any map. 20-acre fortress disguised as paradise. Stone walls thick enough to muffle gunshots. Security cameras hidden in lotus blossoms. Guards who smile in Korean and threaten in silence. It's where legitimate business dies and dirty money gets laundered clean. Where politicians come for charity galas and leave with envelopes. Where witnesses disappear and questions get you killed. And at the center of this beautiful, blood-soaked empire, a little girl trapped not in grief, but in knowledge. Jasmine Floyd arrived with a mop and a mandate. Clean. Don't speak. Don't look. Don't ask. She needed the money. Her nephew needed surgery. The agency warned her. High security position. Triple pay. Discretion mandatory. The last maid who got too close ended up in the hospital. Fell down the stairs, they said. But when Jiwoo's trembling fingers formed broken shapes under the dinner table, sign language mixed with terror, Jasmine recognized something everyone else had missed. The girl wasn't traumatized into silence. She was terrified into it. Jasmine signed softly, barely visible. I see you. Jiwoo's dark eyes went wide. Her hands flew up, urgent pleading. They're watching. Help me. In the next 47 minutes, you'll witness how one woman's hands translated terror into testimony. How a child's silence became the loudest confession. How an empire built on blood and buried truth finally answered for its sins. Because sometimes justice doesn't roar. Sometimes it signs, clearly, carefully, unstoppably, until the whole world has no choice but to pay attention. Can we pause for just a second? Because if you're already feeling something, if that image of a 9-year-old's hands screaming in silence just hit you somewhere deep, then you're my people. You're the ones who understand that the most powerful stories aren't loud. They're the ones whispered in languages we forgot to learn. This isn't just a story. It's a reminder that listening is a pachacos. And if you value that, if you're tired of content that doesn't make you feel something real, hit subscribe. Join the others who refuse to look away. Then let's see how far one woman will go to give a child her voice back. Jasmine Floyd learned sign language the way most people learn prayer, out of desperate, aching necessity. She was 12 when Nelson came home from the hospital different. 7 years old, burning with fever for 3 days before their mother scraped together enough for the clinic. By then, meningitis had already stolen his hearing. The doctor said it with a kind of clinical detachment reserved for poor families. Permanent damage. He'll need specialists. Speech therapy. Hearing aids if you can afford them. They couldn't afford them. Their mother worked 3 jobs, morning shift at the hospital cafeteria, afternoon cleaning offices downtown, nights at the airport Cinnabon. She'd come home smelling like cinnamon and bleach, count coins on the kitchen table, her hands shaking from exhaustion. We'll figure it out, babies. We'll figure it out. But systems don't wait for you to figure it out. Nelson's school had no resources for deaf students. Teachers spoke louder, as if volume could penetrate silence. Kids called him stupid when he couldn't respond to their taunts. Jasmine became his interpreter before she knew what the word meant, learning ASL from library books with photocopied pages, teaching herself to translate a world that refused to learn his language. She'd sign his thoughts in parent-teacher conferences while administrators stared at her like she was performing magic tricks. She'd translate playground insults so he could decide whether to laugh or cry. She became his voice, his bridge, his only proof that he still existed to people who couldn't be bothered to see him. Nelson died when he was 16. Wrong place, wrong time, wrong hands moving in ways two police officers decided looked threatening. They said he was agitated and non-compliant. They said they feared for their safety. They said they had no pachacos. He'd been signing, "I can't hear you. I'm deaf. Please." The officers saw a black teenager's hands moving fast and furious, and they saw a weapon. By the time Jasmine arrived at the scene, her brother was already gone, his hands still frozen in the shape of the word help. She made 2 promises at his funeral, her own hands signing them over his closed casket. "I'll never stop listening." And, "I'll never trust systems that treat people like problems." The years that followed were a study in invisibility. Domestic work, mostly, the kind of labor where you're expected to clean a house without being seen, fold clothes without leaving fingerprints, exist without taking up space. She worked for lawyers who left confidential documents on kitchen counters, tech executives who had screaming matches in front of her like she was furniture, celebrities who'd walk around naked because the help didn't count as human. She learned that being invisible had advantages. People said things they shouldn't say, did things they shouldn't do, forgot she had eyes, ears, a memory. She learned to move through wealthy spaces like a ghost, present but unnoticed, watching everything, saying nothing. When the private placement agency called with the offer, Jasmine knew it was dangerous before they finished the pitch. High security position. Household staff for a very private family. Triple your current rate, but discretion is mandatory. We need someone who understands that some employers value silence. The recruiter's smile was practiced, but her eyes were serious. "Questions are forbidden, Miss Floyd. If you see something, you didn't see it. If you hear something, you didn't hear it. The last girl..." She paused, reorganizing her words. "The last girl tried to help when she wasn't asked. She had an unfortunate accident. Fell down some stairs. Terrible thing." Jasmine should have said no. Every instinct to Nelson's death had taught her screamed, "Walk away. Don't get involved. Protect yourself." But her sister's boy, Nelson too, named after his uncle, needed surgery for a congenital heart defect. $18,000 they didn't have. Insurance that wouldn't cover it. A waiting list that didn't wait for poor families. She took the job. The Kong estate rose from manicured earth like something transported from another world. Traditional Korean architecture, curved tile roofs, carved wooden beams, stone pathways arranged in deliberate asymmetry. But modernity lurked in every shadow. Cameras disguised as decorative fixtures in the lotus gardens, pressure sensors hidden beneath artfully placed stepping stones, guards in tailored suits with earpieces and cold eyes stationed at every entrance. The stone walls were 12 feet high, topped with elegant ironwork that did nothing to hide their true purpose, keeping the world out, or keeping something in. Mrs. Pacheco met her at the service entrance, a woman whose face had been trained into permanent severity, whose posture suggested military background, whose voice could flay skin without raising volume. She delivered instructions like combat orders. "You will clean the West Wing only. You will not speak to Mr. Kong unless directly addressed. You will not approach the child under any circumstances. You will finish your work and leave by 6 o'clock daily. Do you understand?" "Yes, ma'am." The previous employee made the mistake of thinking she could help. Mrs. Pacheco's eyes held something that might have been warning or threat, perhaps both. She was found unconscious in the parking garage. Fell and hit her head, poor thing. These things happen when people forget their place. Jasmine's stomach turned, but she nodded. $18,000. Nelson Too's heart. She could do this. She could be invisible. Her first glimpse of Jiwoo came 3 hours into her shift. Jasmine was carrying linens through the east corridor when movement caught her eye through a window. The music room. A small figure in expensive clothes, silk and lace that probably cost more than Jasmine's monthly rent, sitting at a grand piano that gleamed like black ice. The girl's fingers hovered above the keys but never touched them. She sat perfectly still, her dark hair falling like a curtain around her face, her posture rigid with a kind of discipline that looked learned, enforced. There was something unsettling about her stillness, not the peaceful quiet of a child lost in thought, but the frozen terror of prey hiding from predators. Jasmine told herself to keep walking. Not your business. Not your problem. But then her grip slipped. The water glass on her tray tilted, fell, shattered against marble floor. Jiwoo's hands flew up, not to cover her ears against the sound, but into the air, forming shapes. Fast, frantic, desperate shapes. Broken ASL mixed with what looked like Korean Sign Language and something else entirely. Something coded, invented, urgent. Jasmine's hands moved before her brain authorized them. She signed, careful, glass. Time stopped. Jiwoo's head snapped up. Her dark eyes, hollow and ancient in her child's face, locked onto Jasmine's hands. For one heartbeat, two, she stared like she was seeing a ghost. Then her hands moved, slow and trembling, forming words in messy, urgent ASL. You understand? Miss Floyd. Mrs. Pacheco's voice from the doorway was winter itself. Jasmine's hands dropped to her sides as she bowed, heart hammering. I'm sorry, ma'am. The glass. The child doesn't use those gestures. Don't confuse her. Each word precisely placed, like stones building a wall. Clean this mess and return to your duties. Jasmine knelt, gathering broken glass, keeping her eyes down. Professional. Invisible. Safe. But as she stood to leave, a sound stopped her. 3 piano notes, repeated. Tap, tap, tap. Pause. Tap, tap, tap. The same pattern Nelson used to signal across their tiny apartment when their mother was asleep, and he needed his sister. 3 taps, 3 beats, 1 message. I need you. Jasmine turned. Jiwoo sat at the piano again, perfectly still, fingers resting on ivory keys. But her eyes tracked Jasmine's, and in them was something Jasmine recognized from her own mirror after Nelson died. Not grief. Terror. The kind of fear that doesn't scream because screaming gets you killed. The Kong estate didn't just house a family. It commanded an empire. Jasmine learned this the way domestic workers always learn the truth, through fragments whispered in the staff kitchen, through observation of patterns the powerful think the invisible can't decode, through the weight of silence that pressed down on the mansion like atmospheric pressure before a storm. Every visitor arrived in black cars with windows tinted dark enough to hide faces. They moved in formation. 2 men in front, principal in the middle, 2 men behind, with the practiced choreography of people who understood threats were everywhere. Conversations happened in rapid Korean, voices dropping to whispers when they passed doorways where staff might overhear. Security rotations changed every 4 hours with military precision, guards checking credentials even for people who'd visited dozens of times before. Kong Min-ho owns half the real estate in Koreatown. One of the other housekeepers murmured during a cigarette break Jasmine wasn't supposed to witness. But that's just the front. Money laundering for half the East Coast operations. He's got politicians, judges, police captains on payroll. The ones who aren't bought are too scared to touch him. And the wife, another asked, her voice barely audible. Lee Soo-yeon. Murdered 2 years ago. Home invasion, they said. The speaker's laugh was bitter. In a house with 15 security guards and cameras on every corner. Police never found the killers. Never even looked that hard. Jasmine kept her head down, scrubbing baseboards that didn't need scrubbing, but her hands had gone cold. Mrs. Pacheco explained the child's situation with the same clinical detachment doctors had used to tell Jasmine's mother that Nelson's hearing was gone forever. Mr. Kang's daughter Jiwoo witnessed the murder. Since that night, she hasn't spoken a single word. The specialists call it selective mutism, trauma response. Others say it's oppositional defiance, her way of punishing her father for failing to protect her mother. She poured tea with hands that never shook, her face revealing nothing. Mr. Kong has tried everything. The best child psychiatrists in the country, behavioral therapists, specialists who charge $10,000 a session, rewards, consequences, medications. 12 nannies have tried to reach her. All of them failed. What happened to them? Jasmine asked before she could stop herself. Mrs. Pacheco's eyes flicked up, sharp as surgical steel. They quit. Or were let go. When you fail to perform your duties, Miss Floyd, employment ends. That's how these arrangements work. But Jasmine heard what wasn't said. Don't fail. Don't try to help. Do your job and nothing else. She lasted 3 days before she saw what everyone else was missing. Dinner service in the formal dining room. Jasmine's job was to stand against the wall, refill water glasses on silent cue, exist without existing. Mr. Kong sat at the head of the table, a man whose grief had calcified into something harder and colder than stone. Beside him, Park Sang-woo, his lieutenant, all smooth smiles and expensive cologne. Park raised his glass, his voice warm with practiced sympathy. To Lee Soo-yeon's beautiful memory. 2 years gone, but never forgotten. Her grace blessed this family, and her love lives on in Ji-woo's beautiful face. He turned to the girl, his smile perfect. Your mother would be so proud of the young woman you're becoming. Ji-woo's fork clattered against her plate. Her breathing accelerated, short, sharp gasps. Her eyes went wide, pupils dilating with something that looked like pure terror. And her hands, hidden beneath the table where only Jasmine's angle could see them, began moving frantically. Signing, liar, killer, liar, liar. No one else noticed. Mr. Kong was staring at his wine glass like it held answers. Park's smile never wavered, but then his cold eyes flicked toward Ji-woo. Just for a second. Just long enough to deliver a message Jasmine could read even without sign language. I'm watching. Stay silent. Ji-woo's hands stopped moving. She picked up her fork with trembling fingers, took a small bite she didn't chew, swallowed like she was forcing down poison. Jasmine's heart hammered so loud, she was certain everyone could hear it. After dinner, she found Ji-woo in the garden maze, hidden among sculpted hedges that turned the grounds into a labyrinth. The girl sat on a stone bench carved with Korean characters Jasmine couldn't read, her small body hunched, like she was trying to disappear into herself. Jasmine knelt on the pathway, far enough away to not seem threatening, close enough to be seen. She signed slowly, carefully. Are you okay? Ji-woo's head snapped up. For a moment, hope flashed across her face, bright and desperate and heartbreaking. Then fear crushed it. She glanced around frantically, checking shadows, checking sight lines. Finally, she signed back, her hands trembling. Mama knew. Jasmine waited. Mama found something. Papers. Money going wrong places. She told Uncle Park. She would tell Papa. Ji-woo's signs grew more agitated, less controlled. That night, men came. Uncle Park was supposed to protect us. He was supposed to keep us safe. Her hand stopped. Started again. He watched them hurt Mama. He stood there and watched. Then he told me if I ever told anyone, I would die too. Just like her. The world tilted. Jasmine felt like she was falling even though she was kneeling on solid stone.
Who watches you? She signed.
Ji-woo's eyes cut upward. Jasmine followed her gaze to the security camera mounted in the garden wall, its red light blinking steadily. Then Ji-woo looked toward the house, to a window on the second floor where a silhouette stood motionless. Watching. Park Sang-woo. All of them. Ji-woo signed, tears streaming down her face. Uncle Park.
His men. The guards.
Everyone. If I tell, I die like Mama. So I stay quiet. I stay alive. Jasmine's hands shook so badly she could barely form the signs. I won't let anything happen to you. Ji-woo's laugh was soundless, her hands moving with terrible certainty. You can't stop them. No one can. Mama tried. She stood, walking toward the house with the mechanical movements of someone who'd given up hoping for rescue. But she paused at the maze entrance, turning back to sign one more thing. Don't try to help me, Miss Jasmine. The last nanny who did fell down the stairs. The one before her had a car accident. They call them accidents, but I know. I always know. Then she disappeared into the house, leaving Jasmine kneeling in the garden, understanding with perfect, terrible clarity. Ji-woo's silence wasn't trauma. It was survival strategy. And every person who'd tried to give her a voice had paid for it. They built their language in the margins of surveillance, in the blind spots between watchers. It started with accidents that weren't accidents. Jasmine would drop a cleaning cloth near where Ji-woo sat reading. The girl would help pick it up. Their hands would meet for 3 seconds, long enough to exchange signs invisible to anyone not looking for them. Safe combined with secret. Danger merged with quiet. A vocabulary of survival spelled out in stolen moments. The cameras couldn't catch everything. Guards couldn't be everywhere. And the powerful always underestimated the invisible. The black maid was furniture. The traumatized child was broken. Neither posed a threat. That was their advantage. The only one they had. The piano became their safest place. Jiwoo would practice scales, the same ones, endlessly repeated, while Jasmine dusted the music room's endless surfaces. Each tap of keys was a letter. Each pause was a space between words. To anyone watching, it was a child going through motions her tutors demanded, a maid doing her job. To them, it was communication, testimony, truth being spelled out one note at a time. Mama found papers in Papa's study. Jiwoo tapped out over 3 days of scales. Money going to wrong people. Names Papa said were enemies, but Uncle Park was paying them. Millions of dollars. Mama made copies. She told Uncle Park she would tell Papa everything. Jasmine's hands trembled while she polished the same spot on the piano's surface for the 5th time. What did Park do? He smiled. He told Mama she was very smart. He asked her to wait, to meet him that night after Papa went to his club. He said they would figure out what to do together. He said he would protect her. The keys went silent for a full minute. Then, that night, men came. Mama tried to hide me in the closet. I watched through the crack. Uncle Park let them in. He stood there while they... The keys struck hard, discordant.
He watched.
When it was over, he came to my closet. He told me if I ever told Papa, if I ever spoke about what I saw, the men would come back for me. He said accidents happen to little girls who can't keep secrets. He said he was protecting me by teaching me to stay quiet. Jasmine set down her cloth, her hands forming signs Jiwoo could see in the piano's polished surface. Where are the papers now? Mama hid them. Before that night, she told me where, made me memorize it. She said if anything happened to her, I should tell Papa. But I can't tell him. Not while Uncle Park is here. Not while they're watching. The truth crystallized. This wasn't childhood trauma. This was witness protection in reverse. A prisoner in her own home, surviving on silence, waiting for a rescue that might never come. But the estate noticed. It always noticed. Park Sang-woo began appearing more frequently in spaces where Jasmine worked. Never directly confronting, always just around corners, always watching with those calculating eyes that missed nothing. He'd smile when she bowed, nod politely when she stepped aside, but his presence was a warning written in silent threat. I see you. I'm watching. Be careful. Mrs. Pacheco delivered official warnings in her office, a sparse room that smelled like industrial cleaner and held no decoration except a photo of her shaking hands with Mr. Kong. Mr. Park has expressed concerns about your proximity to the child. He feels you're overstepping appropriate boundaries for your position. I'm just doing my job, ma'am. Your job is to clean, Miss Floyd, not to interact with a traumatized child you're unqualified to help. Her eyes held something that might have been sympathy, might have been warning. The previous employees thought they were helping too. You've heard what happened to them. Jasmine's nephew's surgery was scheduled in 3 weeks. $18,000 already committed, half paid, the rest due before they'd even begin. She couldn't afford to lose this job. Couldn't afford to walk away. Nelson Too's heart wouldn't wait for her conscience to catch up with her survival instinct. But every night, she'd hear it. 3 taps on glass.
Pause.
3 taps again. Jiwoo's window, visible from the staff parking lot. The girl standing in darkness, small hand against glass, sending the same signal Nelson used to send across their apartment when he needed his sister. I need you.
Please don't leave me.
I need you. On the 17th night, Jasmine made a decision. She crossed the darkened grounds, avoiding security rotations she'd memorized, moving through blind spots she'd mapped during 3 weeks of invisible observation. Jiwoo's window was unlocked. The girl had been expecting her. This is dangerous. Jasmine signed in the darkness. Everything is dangerous. Jiwoo signed back. But you're the first person who's seen me in 2 years. Really seen me. If you leave like the others, I'll disappear. I'll become what they want, silent forever. A ghost in my own life. Her hands trembled in moonlight. Mama told me to be brave, to tell the truth even when it's scary. But I've been a coward. I've been so scared, I forgot how to be anything else. Jasmine knelt to eye level. You're not a coward. You're surviving. That's not the same thing. But surviving isn't living. Jiwoo's signs were small, resigned. And I'm so tired of just surviving. They sat in the darkness. 2 people who'd learned that silence was currency in a world that didn't want to hear them. A black woman who'd watched her brother die because his hands spoke the wrong language. A Korean girl watching killers walk free because her voice was too dangerous. If I help you, Jasmine signed slowly, it might cost me everything. I know. If we do this wrong, they'll kill us both. I know that too. Jasmine thought of Nelson's hands frozen in help. Thought of her nephew's damaged heart. Thought of all the years she'd learned to be invisible, to stay safe, to survive by never getting involved. Then she thought of Jiwoo's eyes, ancient with terror, young with hope, and made of pachacos that had nothing to do with safety. Teach me everything, she signed. Every detail, every name, everything your mother found. We're going to end this, but we're going to do it right. Jiwoo's shoulders shook with soundless crying. Then her hands moved, determined. Uncle Park keeps copies of everything. He thinks no one can touch him because he has Papa's trust. He's gotten careless. I know where he keeps his files. I know his safe combination. I watched him open it through the door crack. Can you get to it? He goes to the city office every Thursday afternoon. 3 hours. It's the only time his study is empty. Jasmine calculated. 3 days. The surgery deposit was due in 4. If they moved fast, if they were careful, if they were lucky.
Thursday, she signed.
We move Thursday. But after that, I need you to trust me to handle this right.
Can you do that?
Jiwoo nodded. Then she tapped out the pattern on her windowsill, the one that had become their lifeline. I need you. Jasmine tapped back with her own knuckles. I'm here. I'm not leaving. Even though every instinct screamed at her to run. Even though she knew that people who threatened empires didn't survive. Even though she was signing away her own safety for a child she barely knew. Because Nelson died when no one listened. And Jasmine had promised, I'll never stop listening. Even when listening cost everything. Autumn arrived at the calm estate like a stage production. Leaves turning gold on command, chrysanthemums blooming in precise arrangements, air crisp enough to require elegant shawls, but not so cold as to be uncomfortable. The annual tea ceremony was Minho's masterpiece of performance art. Traditional Korean ritual weaponized as organized crime networking, legitimacy purchased with white silk and ceremonial formality. White tents billowed across the lawn like sails on a sea of perfectly trimmed grass. String quartets played classical Korean compositions. Servers in traditional hanbok moved like ghosts between tables laden with delicate porcelain and autumn fruit arrangements that probably cost more than Jasmine's monthly rent. Diplomats mingled with business leaders. Judges laughed with real estate developers. Politicians posed for photographs with community organizers whose organizations Minho funded generously, publicly, with money scrubbed clean enough that no one asked where it came from. And at the center of it all, calm Minho in a perfectly tailored charcoal suit, his grief worn like expensive armor, playing the role of devoted widower and loving father. Beside him, Jiwoo in a pink hanbok that made her look like a porcelain doll, beautiful, silent, ornamental. A prop in her father's performance of respectability. Jasmine watched from the periphery, serving tea to guests who didn't see her, carrying trays through crowds that parted around her like water around stone. Invisible again. Safe in her invisibility. Until Park Sang-woo stood to make his toast. He rose with practiced grace, champagne flute catching afternoon light, his smile warm and his eyes dead. The crowd quieted. Even the string quartet paused. Ladies and gentlemen, honored guests. His voice carried across the garden like syrup poured over poison. Today we gather not just to celebrate community, but to honor a memory that continues to bless this family. Lee Soo-yeon was grace itself, a woman whose kindness touched everyone she met, whose love elevated everyone she knew. He turned to Jiwoo, raising his glass higher. Her memory lives on in her daughter's beautiful face. And I know, that Lee Soo-yeon would be so proud of the woman Jiwoo is becoming. Strong, resilient, honoring her mother's legacy with quiet dignity. The guests murmured appreciation. Minho nodded, his jaw tight with emotion. Jiwoo's hands clenched into fists. Jasmine saw it first, the way the girl's breathing changed from controlled to ragged, the way her eyes went wide with something beyond fear.
Rage.
Pure, helpless, suffocating rage. Her hands flew up from her lap, signing frantically into empty air. Liar. Murderer. You killed her. The guests shifted, uncomfortable. A child having some sort of episode. How unfortunate. How embarrassing. But Ji-woo couldn't stop. Her hands moved faster, tears streaming down her face, signs becoming more agitated. You stood there and watched. You let them hurt her. You killed her. Minho's voice cut through the murmurs. Ji-woo, control yourself. But control had shattered. The girl was drowning in 2 years of silence, choking on truth she'd swallowed to stay alive. Her hands screamed what her voice couldn't. Liar, 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 liar. Jasmine watched Park's face. Just for a second, half a second, his mask slipped. The warm smile vanished. What replaced it was cold calculation, clinical assessment of a problem that needed eliminating. His eyes tracked Ji-woo's hands, reading the signs even if no one else could, understanding that this child was becoming a liability he could no longer afford. Jasmine's tray hit the grass. She was moving before thought, before permission, before Mrs. Pacheco's hissed warning. Don't you dare. She crossed the lawn between service periphery and the center of power, between invisibility and witness. Guests parted, shocked. Security tensed. Park's eyes narrowed. Jasmine knelt beside Ji-woo, placing herself between the girl and everyone watching. Her signs were clear, deliberate, calming. Breathe. I'm here. You're safe right now. Ji-woo's eyes locked onto hers, drowning eyes finding a lifeline. The frantic signing slowed. Her breathing came in gasping sobs, but the panic was ebbing. The garden fell silent. Every eye on the black maid in her service uniform, kneeling beside the Mafia princess, communicating in a language none of them understood. Who gave you permission to touch my daughter? Minho's voice was ice-wrapped in steel. He stood, and Jasmine realized how much of his power came from sheer physical presence. 6 feet of controlled violence in an expensive suit, a man who'd built an empire on making people afraid. Jasmine stood slowly, meeting his gaze without flinching. Every instinct screamed at her to bow, apologize, retreat into invisibility. But Ji-woo's small hand gripped her sleeve, and Nelson's frozen hands flashed in her memory. No one, sir. Her voice was steady. But someone needed to listen. Park Sang-woo stepped forward, his smile returning like a mask sliding back into place. Minho, clearly this woman doesn't understand appropriate boundaries. For everyone's safety, for Ji-woo's safety, she should be removed immediately. His emphasis on safety was a threat wrapped in concern. Jasmine heard what he wasn't saying. Accidents happen. Falls. Crashes. Disappearances. Minho nodded once. Security moved in. 2 guards, professional and efficient, hands on Jasmine's arms. Ji-woo's scream was soundless, but her hands shouted. And oh, she's the only one. Don't send her away. The guests murmured, uncomfortable. The child was clearly disturbed, traumatized. The maid had overstepped. Everything could return to normal once this unfortunate disruption was handled. But only Jasmine understood the girl's signs. Only Jasmine saw Park's expression, relief mixing with cold determination. A problem being solved. As the guards escorted her toward the gate, Jasmine caught one last glimpse of Ji-woo. The girl had gone still again, hands folded on the table, face blank, playing dead to survive another day. But her fingers were moving, tapping the table in deliberate rhythm. Tap, pause, tap, pause, tap, 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 pause. Morse code. Nelson taught it to Jasmine when they were kids, turning their shared bedroom into a secret communication network. She taught it to him first in ASL, then he'd insisted on learning the audible version, taps and rhythms that could speak across darkness. Jasmine decoded it as the guards pushed her through the service gate. UNCLEKILLEDMEMHEWNTSMENEXT. The message repeated, over and over. Ji-woo's fingers tapping out her death sentence in a language only one person in that garden could understand. The guards released Jasmine at her car. Don't come back. You're fired. Your final check will be mailed. She sat in her driver's seat, hands shaking, transcribing the message on her phone before adrenaline wiped her memory clean. Uncle killed Mama. He wants me next. Not a suspicion. Not trauma-induced confusion. Testimony. Delivered in the only language Ji-woo had left, to the only person who'd bothered to learn it. Jasmine looked back at the estate, white tents and elegant guests, and a little girl sitting perfectly still at her father's side, playing the role of damaged ornament while her would-be killer smiled and poured more champagne. She thought of Nelson's hands frozen in help. Thought of 12 nannies who'd quit or disappeared. Thought of Lee Soo-yeon, who'd found evidence and tried to speak truth and died for it. She thought of Ji-woo's fingers tapping out her own death warrant, trusting that someone would finally hear. Jasmine started her car, but she didn't drive home. Jasmine's apartment was a study in careful survival, tiny studio in a building where sirens were lullabies and gunshots were punctuation. 700 square feet of overpriced safety, but it was hers. No one could fire her from her own four walls. She sat at the kitchen table, secondhand wood that wobbled unless you knew which leg to prop, transcribing Ji-woo's message over and over, writing it in letters, in Morse code, in ASL descriptions, as if repetition would transform testimony into evidence, as if enough transcriptions would make the truth solid enough to be believed. Uncle killed Mama. He wants me next. The message was clear. The proof was invisible. She thought of Ji-woo's signs from their piano conversations. Mama found papers. If Lee Soo-yeon had discovered evidence of Park's embezzlement or betrayal, she would have hidden it. Somewhere her husband wouldn't find it. Somewhere her daughter would know. Somewhere in that fortress of cameras and guards and armed men who smiled in Korean and killed in silence. At 3 a.m., Jasmine made a decision that could get her killed. She drove back to the estate through streets empty except for delivery trucks and people whose work happened in darkness. The Kong estate slept under armed watch, but Jasmine had memorized security rotations during 3 weeks of invisible observation. She knew when guards smoked cigarettes in the North Garden. Knew when shift changes created 30-second windows in camera coverage. Knew which sensors had blind spots and which walls had handholds. She parked 3 blocks away and moved through shadows like she'd learned to move through wealthy homes, present but unnoticed, existing in the margins where the powerful didn't look. The service entrance required a code, but she'd watched Mrs. Pacheco punch it in dozens of times. Staff turnover was high enough that they hadn't changed it in months, 6 digits that spelled out loyalty on a phone keypad. The irony wasn't lost on her. Inside, the mansion held its breath. Marble halls stretched in darkness. Cameras blinked red in corners. Somewhere, guards monitored feeds. Somewhere, armed men waited for threats. Jasmine climbed the servants' stairs, narrow passages designed for invisible labor. Second floor, east wing. Ji-woo's window faced the garden, visible from the staff parking lot where the girl had tapped her nightly plea for help. The trellis outside was ornamental ironwork disguised as decoration, but it held Jasmine's weight. She climbed like her life depended on it, because it did. Every handhold was a prayer. Every foothold was faith that Ji-woo was awake, waiting ready. The window opened before she reached it. Ji-woo's face appeared in darkness, eyes too old for 9 years, expression carrying 2 years of terror. She helped Jasmine through the window in silence, both of them moving with the practiced stealth of people who'd learned that noise meant danger. Where? Jasmine mouthed, not risking even whispered sound. Ji-woo pointed to the piano, that beautiful instrument that had become their language, their lifeline, their secret communication network. Together they crossed to it. Ji-woo's small hands lifted the fallboard that covered the keys. Then she reached inside, feeling along the underside with the confidence of someone who'd done this before, who'd memorized exactly where to press. A click. A small compartment Jasmine hadn't known existed. Inside, taped to the underside, a USB drive. Photographs. Documents folded tight. Lee Soo-yeon with a ledger, her expression serious, photographing pages. Park Sang-woo meeting with men Jasmine recognized from news articles about rival organizations. Meetings that shouldn't happen if Park was loyal to Minho. Wire transfer receipts showing millions rerouted to offshore accounts. Names. Dates. Evidence of systematic embezzlement that had been bleeding the Kong organization for years. And one photograph that made Jasmine's blood freeze. Park Sang-woo standing outside the Kong home, checking his watch. The date-time stamp glowed in the corner. The night of Lee Soo-yeon's murder. 11:47 p.m. According to police reports, Park had been across town at a business dinner, his alibi verified by a dozen witnesses who probably owed him money or favors or their lives. But here he was, right outside, checking his watch like he was waiting for something, or making sure something happened on schedule. A floorboard creaked in the hallway. Jiwoo's eyes went wide. She signed frantically. Hide. He checks on me. Jasmine's heart stopped. She looked around, closet too obvious, bathroom too far. She dropped and rolled under the bed just as the door opened, pulling the USB drive and photographs with her. Polished leather shoes entered her line of sight. Italian. Expensive. Park Sang-woo's shoes, which she'd seen dozens of times while serving tea, while standing invisible in corners, while being furniture that wealthy people walked past. Can't sleep, little bird? His voice was syrup poured over gravel, warm on the surface, poison underneath. Jasmine pressed her face to the floor, controlling her breathing, praying her racing heart wasn't audible. Still thinking about that woman who tried to help you today? A pause, deliberately cruel. She's gone now. Just like everyone who gets too close. Just like everyone who thinks they can save you. Silence. Jiwoo was probably signing something, defiance or fear or both, but Park either couldn't see in the darkness or didn't care. You're a smart girl, Jiwoo. I know you are. Your mother was smart too. His voice dropped lower, intimate and threatening. She found things she shouldn't have found. She made copies she shouldn't have made. She threatened to tell your father things that would have destroyed everything we built together. The shoes moved closer to the bed. Jasmine held her breath. Your mother learned what happens to people who talk. I hope you're smarter than she was. I hope you understand that some secrets are kept with silence, and some secrets are kept with graves. A pause. Don't make me teach you the same lesson I taught her. The door closed. Jasmine lay paralyzed for 30 seconds, 60, 90. Finally, Jiwoo's face appeared over the edge of the bed, her hands trembling as she helped Jasmine out. Jasmine's hands shook so badly she could barely sign. I'm going to end this. You won't have to be silent anymore. Jiwoo signed back, tears streaming down her face. He'll kill you. Just like Mama. Just like the others. He always wins. Only if I let him see me coming. Jasmine pocketed the USB drive and photographs, evidence that could destroy an empire or get her killed. Probably both. Trust me one more time. I trust you. Jiwoo's signs were small, resigned. But trust doesn't stop bullets. Mama trusted Uncle Park. She died anyway. Jasmine cupped the girl's face, making her meet her eyes. Then she signed slowly, deliberately. Your mother died because she was alone. Because she tried to fight an empire by herself. But you're not alone. Not anymore. I'm here. And I'm going to find others. People who can't be bought or scared into silence. Where? Papa owns the police. Uncle Park owns everyone else. Not everyone. Jasmine signed. Not yet. She climbed back through the window, descended the trellis with evidence burning a hole in her pocket, moved through shadows toward the service entrance and freedom. Behind her, Jiwoo's window glowed softly. The girl stood there, small hand pressed to glass, watching the only person who'd ever really heard her disappear into darkness. Jasmine drove away from the Kong estate with evidence of murder, embezzlement, and conspiracy. With proof that could topple an empire or get her killed before she made it home. She thought of Nelson's frozen hands, of Jiwoo's tapping fingers, of Lee Soo-yeon's hidden USB drive, of all the people who'd tried to speak and been silenced. Justice was possible now, but survival was far from guaranteed. Jasmine didn't go to the police. She'd watched Nelson die while officers claimed they feared for their safety, watch them close ranks, and call it justified. She knew what institutions did when powerful men were threatened. They protected power, not truth. Instead, she went looking for ghosts. Thomas Kang's community center occupied a converted warehouse in Koreatown, walls covered in murals of Korean independence heroes, floors worn smooth by generations of immigrant feet. He ran after-school programs for kids whose parents worked 3 jobs. ESL classes for grandmothers who'd never learned English. A food pantry that didn't ask questions about immigration status. He was Minho's older brother, the one who'd walked away. Jasmine found him teaching a sign language class, a dozen students practicing ASL with the focused intensity of people who understood that communication was survival. When he saw her in the doorway, something flickered in his eyes. Recognition, maybe. or resignation. You're the maid my brother fired yesterday. He signed as he spoke, his students watching both versions of the conversation. The one who touched Jiwoo during the tea ceremony. It's already all over the Korean community news. I need your help. I don't help my brother's business. His voice was firm, but not unkind. I left that world 10 years ago. I don't go back. Jasmine pulled out her phone, showed him the photograph of Park Sang-woo outside the house the night of the murder. Your sister-in-law left evidence. Your niece has been living with her mother's killer for 2 years. If you won't help your brother, help her. Thomas's face went carefully blank, the kind of blank that meant emotions were being crushed behind a dam. He dismissed his class early, locked the center's doors, and led Jasmine to his office. My brother won't believe you, he said quietly, studying the photographs spread across his desk. Park Sang-woo is his oldest friend. They built the empire together, survived wars together. Minho trusts him more than he trusts his own blood. Then I won't convince him with words. Jasmine met his eyes. I'll show him through his daughter's voice. Thomas was quiet for a long moment. Then he picked up his phone, scrolled through contacts, made a call. Agent Park? It's Thomas Kong. Remember you said if I ever had information about my brother's organization, I should call?
Well,
I'm calling. Agent Melissa Park, no relation to Sang-woo, she emphasized 3 times, arrived an hour later. FBI Organized Crime Task Force, 15 years investigating Korean-American criminal organizations, 0 successful prosecutions against the Kong operation. Everyone's too terrified to testify, she explained, studying Lee Soo-yeon's evidence with the intensity of someone who'd been hunting this case for years. We know about the money laundering, the extortion, the political corruption. We can prove maybe 10% of it. The rest requires witnesses who'll stand up in court and say, yes, I saw this. Yes, I'll testify. She looked up at Jasmine. Every witness we've ever approached either recants, disappears, or has an unfortunate accident. Your predecessor, the maid who fell, she was going to talk to us. We were meeting the next day. Jasmine's stomach turned. Jiwoo will testify. But not in a courtroom where Park Sang-woo's people can get to her. And not with her voice. Then how? My brother's annual garden party, Thomas said slowly. 3 days from now. It's his big legitimacy performance. Invites every power player in the city. Judges, politicians, business leaders, international associates. He thinks it proves he's respectable. Agent Park's eyes lit with predatory interest. We've been trying to get surveillance authorization for that event for 3 years. If we could record conversations, photograph attendees, document the connections. Better than that. Jasmine's mind was racing, pieces clicking together. What if Jiwoo testifies there? Publicly. In front of all those witnesses. With all those cameras. She doesn't speak. She doesn't need to. Jasmine pulled out her phone, started searching. I know someone. Tech guy owes me a favor. He can set up hidden cameras, live feed, real-time sign language translation displayed on screens. Jiwoo tells her story with her hands. The world watches it appear in English and Korean. Thomas leaned forward. Minho always has those decorative screens at the party. Photo montages of Soo-yeon, inspirational quotes, event information. If we could hijack them, we'd need someone inside to trigger it. Agent Park was already making notes. Someone Park doesn't suspect. Someone with access. They looked at Thomas.
He shook his head.
I haven't been to that estate in 10 years. I'd be spotted immediately. Then it has to be me. Jasmine's voice was steady even as her hands shook. I go back. One last time. They fired you. They'll have you arrested for trespassing. Not if I'm invited. Jasmine turned to Thomas. You run charity programs, right? Minho's party is supposed to be about community outreach, philanthropy. What if your organization was one of the featured beneficiaries? What if you needed to bring staff to help coordinate the event? Thomas smiled grimly. My brother loves public displays of generosity, especially when they come with photo opportunities. I can make the call. Agent Park stood. I'll get authorization for surveillance, legal this time. If Jiwoo's testimony is as damning as this evidence suggests, we can move immediately on arrests. But, she looked at Jasmine seriously. This is incredibly dangerous.
Park will be there.
His security team will be there. If something goes wrong, If something goes wrong, a 9-year-old girl continues, living with her mother's murderer. Jasmine's voice was flat. Until he decides she's too much of a liability and has his own accident. That's not acceptable. The next 48 hours were preparation disguised as ordinary life. Thomas reached out to Minho, got approval for his community center's participation in the garden party. Jasmine's tech guy, actually her ex-girlfriend's cousin who did IT security, built a system that could hijack the display screens remotely. Agent Park assembled a team that would pose as catering staff, each one wired with recording equipment that could hold up in court. The night before the party, Thomas helped Jasmine infiltrate the estate one final time. They moved through shadows together, two people who'd learned different lessons about surviving their family's empire. One by leaving, one by never entering in the first place. Jiwoo was awake, waiting, like she'd been waiting every night for someone to finally believe her. Jasmine taught her the plan through signs. Tomorrow, everyone who hurt you will be in that garden, including the people who can stop them. I need you to tell them everything, not with your voice, with your hands. Can you be brave one more time? Jiwoo's hands shook. Then she signed. If I do this, will Papa finally hear me? Everyone will hear you, Jasmine promised. The whole world. The girl was quiet for a long time. Then, Mama was brave. She tried to tell the truth. It killed her. Your mama was alone. You're not. Jasmine took both of Jiwoo's small hands in hers. I'm here. Your Uncle Thomas is helping. The FBI is ready. Tomorrow, we all speak together. And when we do, they can't silence all of us. Jiwoo's tears fell silently, but her hands were steady as she signed. Okay, I'll do it. For Mama. Jasmine and Thomas left the way they came, invisible, unnoticed, carrying the weight of what they were about to attempt. As they drove away, Thomas asked quietly, "What if this doesn't work? What if Park realizes what's happening and stops it?" Jasmine thought of Nelson's hands frozen mid-sign, of Jiwoo's fingers tapping out her death sentence, of Lee Soo-yeon hiding evidence in a piano, trusting that someday someone would find it and finish what she started. Then we tried, she said. That's more than anyone else has done. Tomorrow, a child would speak in silence. And an empire built on buried truth would finally answer for its sins. If they survived that long. The garden party bloomed like a funeral dressed as celebration. White silk tents billowed across the lawn, their peaks catching October sunlight that had no business, looking so beautiful. String quartets played Vivaldi with mathematical precision. Crystal champagne flutes caught light and threw it back like tiny weapons. Servers in black uniforms, FBI agents with recording devices hidden in bow ties and cufflinks, circulated with trays of hors d'oeuvres that cost more than Jasmine's monthly rent. Criminal bosses in Italian suits laughed with city councilmen. Real estate developers clinked glasses with state senators. Everyone performing legitimacy, everyone pretending the blood money that bought their smiles didn't exist. The Kong estate had transformed itself into a stage, and every guest knew their role in the performance. Kong Minho stood at the center, like a king surveying his kingdom, or what was left of it. His charcoal suit was perfectly tailored, his grief worn like expensive armor. He moved through clusters of guests with practiced grace, accepting condolences about his late wife with the weary dignity of a man who'd been playing this role for 2 years. Beside him, always just within reach, Park Sang-woo circulated like a shark in calm waters, all smooth smiles and warm handshakes, his eyes constantly scanning, assessing, calculating threats. At the head table, Jiwoo sat perfectly still in white lace that made her look like a ghost at her own life. Her hands rested in her lap. Her face was blank. To the guests who noticed her at all, she was a tragic ornament, the poor traumatized child, so damaged she couldn't even speak. Beautiful, pitiful, ignorable. Only Jasmine knew the truth. The girl was a loaded gun waiting to fire. Jasmine moved through the crowd with a silver tray, rehired at the last minute as additional staff, when Thomas Kong pulled strings his brother couldn't refuse. Mrs. Pacheco had been furious, but professional. You will serve champagne. You will not approach the family. You will do your job and nothing else. Jasmine had bowed, agreed, and pocketed the wireless trigger that would change everything. Her uniform was identical to the other servers. Her face was carefully neutral, but her heart hammered against her ribs like it was trying to escape, and the small device in her pocket felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. One press, one signal, and either justice would finally speak, or they'd all die trying. She caught Jiwoo's eye across the garden. The girl's expression didn't change, but her right hand moved, just slightly, just enough. The sign for ready. Jasmine's fingers brushed the trigger.
Not yet.
Wait for the signal. Wait for Minho to take the microphone and deliver the speech that would become his last performance as a grieving widower with nothing to hide. Minho climbed the small stage erected beside the fountain. The string quartet faded into silence. Conversations died. Every eye turned to watch. Thank you all for coming. His voice carried across the garden, strong and clear. 2 years ago, my family suffered an unspeakable tragedy. My wife, Lee Soo-yeon, was taken from us in an act of senseless violence. The pain of that loss, his voice caught perfectly, just enough emotion to seem genuine. The pain remains, but Soo-yeon believed in giving back to our community, in helping families like ours who've experienced trauma and loss. Today, I'm honored to announce the Lee Soo-yeon Memorial Foundation, which will provide counseling and support for families affected by lies. The word didn't come from speakers. It appeared on the massive decorative screens positioned around the garden, displays meant to show photographs of Lee Soo-yeon smiling, gracious, forever frozen in memory. Instead, text blazed across every screen in English and Korean, letters 3 feet tall.
Lies.
All lies. The crowd murmured. Heads turned. Minho froze mid-sentence, his microphone still raised.
Park Sang-woo's smile vanished.
His eyes cut to the tech booth, to the guards, to Jiwoo, who was standing now, her small body rigid with terror and determination, her hands beginning to move with deliberate, practiced precision. Jasmine pressed the trigger in her pocket. The translation app activated. Every sign Jiwoo made appeared as text across every screen, synchronized perfectly. My name is Jiwoo Kong. I haven't spoken in 2 years. Not because I can't, because I was afraid. Gasps rippled through the garden. Minho's face strained of color. Park took a step toward Jiwoo, but 2 of the servers, Agent Melissa Park and her partner, moved to intercept, their hands drifting toward concealed weapons. Jiwoo's hands continued, steady now, gaining confidence. The night my mother died, I watched from the stairs. I saw everything. The screen switched to display the photographs Lee Soo-yeon had hidden, Park Sang-woo standing outside the house, time-stamped the night of the murder. Park meeting with rival gang members. Wire transfer receipts showing millions stolen. Mama found proof that Uncle Park was stealing from Papa. She confronted him. She said she would tell. Jiwoo's signs were clear, unhurried, devastating. That night, men came to our house. Men Uncle Park brought. He told them where we would be. He watched them hurt Mama. He stood there and watched. Silence descended like a guillotine blade. Every guest frozen. Every camera, both hidden FBI surveillance and the estate's own security feeds, recording everything. When it was over, Uncle Park came to me. He told me if I ever told anyone I would die too, just like her. Jiwoo's hands trembled, but didn't stop. So I stayed silent. For 748 days, I stayed silent. Because staying silent kept me alive. Minho turned slowly, mechanically, to face Park Sang-woo. His expression was beyond grief, beyond rage, something colder and more terrible. Recognition. Understanding. The last piece of a puzzle he'd refused to see clicking into place. Park's hands rose, defensive, pleading. Minho, she's a child. Traumatized.
Confused.
You know how grief can. I'm not confused. Jiwoo's signs blazed across the screens. I remember everything. The blood on the carpet. The way Mama's eyes went empty. The way you stood there watching. The way you smiled at Papa the next day and said you were so sorry for his loss. Her hands were shaking now, but the text kept appearing. I remember everything. And now everyone knows. Agent Park dropped the serving tray, her badge appearing in her hand like magic. Park Sang-woo, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, racketeering, wire fraud.
Park ran.
He moved fast for a man in expensive shoes, bolting toward the north garden entrance. But the estate's own guards, men loyal to Minho, not to Park, moved faster. They tackled him into perfectly manicured grass, drove him down hard enough that his scream cut through the garden's shocked silence. The party erupted into chaos. Guests scattered. Cameras flashed. FBI agents emerged from their disguises, moving with choreographed efficiency to secure exits, detain witnesses, document everything. Someone was shouting in Korean. Someone else was calling lawyers. The string quartet kept playing for 3 more bars before they realized the performance was over. Through it all, Minho stood frozen at the microphone, staring across the lawn at his daughter. She stood at the head table, small and trembling in white lace, her hands signing one final message that appeared on every screen. "I just wanted you to hear me, Papa." Then, for the first time in 748 days, Jiwoo spoke aloud. Her voice was cracked from disuse, trembling with emotion, barely more than a whisper, but unmistakably, impossibly, her own. "I just wanted you to hear me." The words shattered something in Minho. He dropped to his knees, reaching toward her, but the distance between them was measured in more than grass and fountains. It was measured in 2 years of silence he'd never bothered to decode. 2 years of a daughter screaming in a language he'd never learned. Jasmine was already moving, crossing the lawn as FBI agents swarmed. She reached Jiwoo and knelt, pulling the girl into her arms as the last of Jiwoo's control finally broke. "You did it," Jasmine whispered, holding tight while the girl's body shook with sobs that had been trapped for 2 years. "You're free now. You're finally free." Jiwoo wept, not silently anymore, not carefully contained. She cried like a child who'd forgotten how to make sound and was remembering in great, gasping waves. She cried for her mother. She cried for herself. She cried because speaking truth hadn't killed her, and she'd been so certain, so absolutely certain, that it would. Around them, the garden party collapsed into its component parts, criminals being handcuffed, witnesses being separated for questioning, federal agents reading rights to men who'd thought themselves untouchable. The empire that had survived on silence and buried truth was coming apart at the seams, disassembled by one child's hands and one woman's refusal to look away. Minho remained on his knees, tears streaming down his face, reaching toward a daughter he'd finally heard but could no longer touch. Not yet. Maybe not ever. The distance between them had been measured in silence, and it would take more than tears to cross it. But Jiwoo had spoken. The truth was out. And somewhere above the chaos, above the arrests and the shouting and the flash of cameras, 3 piano notes drifted on autumn wind, fading into nothing. The signal that said, "I need you," had been answered. Finally, the headlines detonated across every platform like sequential bombs. Mafia princess breaks silence, exposes murder conspiracy. Sign language testimony brings down criminal empire. The maid who gave voice to justice. News vans camped outside Jasmine's apartment building for 3 days straight, reporters shouting questions at her rusted Honda every time she tried to leave for groceries. Within 48 hours, the machine of justice that had been dormant for 2 years roared to life with terrible efficiency. Park Sang-woo arrested, denied bail, held in federal custody. 6 co-conspirators, the men who'd carried out Lee Soo-yeon's murder on his orders, picked up in coordinated raids across 3 states. Federal prosecutors who'd been building the RICO case for years suddenly had what they'd never had before, a witness. Evidence. Proof that could survive courtroom scrutiny. 14 indictments rolled out like dominoes falling. Millions in assets frozen, real estate holdings, offshore accounts, legitimate businesses that had been fronts for laundering blood money. The Kong organization's infrastructure, built over decades of careful violence and strategic corruption, dismantled in 72 hours by a 9-year-old girl's hands and the photographs her mother had hidden in a piano. Jasmine's apartment, 700 square feet of overpriced survival, became ground zero for a media circus she hadn't asked for and didn't want. Interview requests from every major network. Book deal offers from publishers who saw dollar signs in tragedy. Speaking engagement invitations from organizations that wanted to weaponize her story for their own agendas. She refused them all. Every single one. Until a producer from a national morning show knocked on her door personally, a black woman with kind eyes who said simply, The world needs to hear this. Not for entertainment. For proof that listening matters. So Jasmine agreed to one interview. Just one. She sat across from the host in a studio that was too bright, too polished, too far removed from the reality of what had actually happened. The makeup artist had covered the circles under her eyes, but couldn't hide the exhaustion that had settled into her bones. "Why risk your life for a child you barely knew?" the host asked, leaning forward with practiced empathy. Jasmine's answer was simple, delivered without drama or embellishment. "Because I knew what it cost her to stay silent. My brother died because people wouldn't learn his language. I couldn't let her die because no one learned hers." The clip went viral. 3 million views in 24 hours. 6 million by the end of the week. But Jasmine didn't watch it. She was too busy trying to figure out how to exist in a world where her invisibility, her greatest survival tool, had been permanently stripped away. Weeks passed. The firestorm subsided into the slow grind of legal proceedings. Arraignments. Preliminary hearings. Motions and countermotions from defense attorneys who billed $800 an hour to argue that a traumatized child's testimony should be inadmissible. The news cycle moved on to the next tragedy, the next scandal, the next thing that would capture attention for 15 seconds before dissolving into digital vapor. Jasmine returned to her routines. Her nephew's surgery had been successful. The money from the Kong job came through before everything exploded, and Nelson Too's heart was finally fixed. She found work at a different agency, cleaning offices downtown where no one recognized her face or connected her to the headlines. She went to therapy twice a week, working through trauma she hadn't realized she was carrying until it started manifesting in panic attacks at 3 a.m. Jiwoo remained in state custody while social workers and attorneys fought over what came next. Jasmine was allowed supervised visits twice a week at a neutral facility painted in soft colors that were supposed to be calming, but just felt artificial. The girl was speaking now, hesitantly, her voice still rough from disuse, but speaking. Working with therapists who specialized in trauma. Learning that the world wouldn't end if she made sound. Then one evening, 3 months after the garden party, a knock came at Jasmine's door. She opened it expecting another journalist who'd found her address, another well-meaning stranger who wanted to tell her she was brave. Instead, she found Kong Min-ho, not the crime lord from magazine spreads and federal indictments, not the powerful man who'd commanded an empire with violence and fear, just a man hollowed out by failure, carrying devastation in every line of his face. No bodyguards flanking him, no designer suit projecting authority. Just a wrinkled dress shirt and exhaustion that matched her own. "You destroyed everything I built," he said quietly. Not accusatory, just stating fact. Jasmine met his eyes without flinching.
No.
"I saved the only thing you had left." He flinched like she'd struck him, then nodded slowly, accepting the truth of it. "I need to see her. The state has temporary custody, but they're allowing supervised visits now." His voice cracked. "She asked for you to be there." The visitation center was deliberately neutral, a converted community center with rooms painted in murals of trees and clouds, soft furniture that didn't belong to anyone, spaces designed to feel safe, without feeling like home. Jiwoo sat in one of those rooms, wearing jeans and a sweater instead of designer clothes, looking smaller, without the mansion's grandeur to frame her. When Min-ho entered, she didn't run to him, didn't smile, didn't cry. She just watched him with those dark eyes that had seen too much, and her hands moved with deliberate precision. "Do you understand this?" Min-ho shook his head, tears streaming down his face unchecked. Jiwoo signed again, slower, making sure he could see every movement, then learn. The words hung in the air between them, not a rejection, but a requirement. A condition for whatever relationship they might rebuild from the wreckage of everything that had been destroyed. Jasmine stepped forward, her voice gentle but firm. "I can teach you, if you're willing." For the first time, Min-ho looked at Jasmine, really looked, seeing her not as a maid who'd infiltrated his home, not as the woman who'd dismantled his empire, but as the person who'd understood what he'd missed. The person who'd hurt his daughter when he'd been too busy commanding empires to learn her language. "Please," he whispered, and the word carried the weight of a man who'd spent his life never having to ask for anything. "Teach me how to hear my daughter." 18 months later, the Kong estate had been transformed into something its original architects never could have imagined. Where armed guards once patrolled with concealed weapons and cold eyes, children now played, running across grass that had hosted garden parties and witnessed confessions, their laughter ipashkung off stone walls that no longer imprisoned anyone. The gate that had been designed to keep the world out now welcomed it in, a banner stretched across the entrance in English and Korean, the Silent Voices Foundation, where every language is heard. Jasmine walked through classrooms that had been Minho's offices, spaces where deals were made and threats delivered, now filled with small desks and art supplies and children learning that communication came in infinite forms. Sign language classes, art therapy sessions, trauma counseling conducted in whatever language felt safest, spoken words, sign gestures, drawn pictures, written notes. The foundation served kids from traumatized backgrounds, refugees of violence, young witnesses in protective custody who needed somewhere to exist while their testimonies dismantled the empires that had hurt them. In what had been the formal dining room, where Jiwoo had sat silent while Park Sang-woo toasted her dead mother, therapists now worked with children who'd lost their voices to fear, teaching them that speaking truth wouldn't kill them, that silence was a pachikos rather than a sentence. The garden where Jiwoo had testified had been redesigned with input from the children themselves. The fountain remained, but surrounding it now were sensory gardens with plants chosen for texture and scent, quiet spaces for kids who needed to retreat from overwhelming emotions, and a small stage where anyone could stand and speak, or sign, or sing, or simply exist, without judgment. Today was the Foundation's first anniversary celebration. Donors mingled with staff, former guests from that infamous garden party who'd been moved by what they'd witnessed and wanted to contribute to something that healed rather than destroyed. Politicians who'd once taken Minho's money now wrote checks to his foundation, perhaps seeking their own redemption, perhaps genuinely moved. It didn't matter. The money spent the same either way. Jiwoo, now 11, took the microphone on the garden stage with confidence that would have been unimaginable 2 years ago. She wore simple clothes, jeans and a foundation t-shirt, and her hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail. She looked like any other kid preparing to give a speech, except for her hands, which moved in constant parallel to her words, honoring both languages. For 2 years, I thought silence would keep me safe,
But it was killing me.
Her voice was clear now, strengthened by months of therapy and practice. Ms. Jasmine taught me that speaking the truth, even without sound, is the bravest thing we can do. That being heard doesn't require volume. It requires someone willing to listen. She turned to where Jasmine stood with a group of children, kids from the Foundation's residential program, all signing, "I see you" in unison, their small hands moving in synchronized testimony to being witnessed. This place exists because one woman refused to look away, because she knew that listening isn't about hearing words. It's about understanding souls. Jiwoo's hands emphasized each point, her signs as articulate as her speech. My mama tried to speak truth and died for it. I stayed silent for 748 days because I thought survival meant silence. But Ms. Jasmine taught me that sometimes the most dangerous thing you can do, and the most necessary, is refuse to be quiet. At the back of the gathering, Minho watched. He was no longer the crime lord who'd built an empire on violence and fear. That man had been dismantled along with his organization, stripped down to component parts in federal courtrooms where he'd testified against his former associates, providing evidence that put dozens behind bars. The plea deal had kept him out of prison, cooperation and complete liquidation of assets to victims' funds in exchange for house arrest and community service. Now he worked alongside Jasmine and the Foundation staff, learning sign language with the dedication of a man trying to earn back what he'd lost, speaking at schools about the cost of violence and the importance of hearing what children weren't saying out loud. He caught Jasmine's eye across the garden and signed slowly, still learning but determined. "Thank you for teaching me." She signed back with practice fluency. "Thank you for finally learning." The celebration continued. Speeches from donors, performances by the children, testimonials from parents whose kids had found their voices again within these walls. As the afternoon softened into evening, Jasmine slipped away to one of the classrooms where a new group was starting tomorrow. She arranged chairs in a circle, set out sign language alphabet charts, prepared materials for teaching kids who'd arrive scared and silent and desperate for someone to understand them. Afternoon sunlight streamed through windows that had once overlooked a crime lord's empire and now witnessed daily resurrections. Children learning they could exist loudly, could take up space, could speak in whatever language their trauma allowed. A soft knock interrupted her preparation. One of the new arrivals, a girl maybe 7 years old, recently removed from an abusive home, still carrying that hollow-eyed expression Jasmine recognized from Jiwoo's face 2 years ago. Moved hesitantly, forming signs she'd probably learned from a social worker. Will I ever speak again? Jasmine knelt to eye level, her hands moving with gentle certainty. You're already speaking, and I hear every word. The girl's eyes filled with tears, relief, hope, the beginning of understanding that silence didn't have to be permanent, that voices could be rebuilt in whatever form they needed to take. Behind them, through the window, the garden party continued. The mansion that had once imprisoned a child in terror now liberated dozens in healing. The estate that had represented power built on silence now echoed with truth spoken in every language, signed and spoken and drawn and written and tapped in rhythm against tables. All of it valid. All of it witnessed. Music drifted up from the celebration. Not string quartets playing for criminals anymore, but children's laughter and adult conversation, and the sound of people building something that mattered from the ruins of something that had only destroyed. Jiwoo appeared in the doorway, signing to Jasmine. They're asking for you. For the final speech. Jasmine signed back. Tell them I'm exactly where I need to be. Because she was. Kneeling in a classroom that used to be an office where threats were delivered, holding the hands of a child who'd lost her voice, teaching her the same lesson Nelson had taught Jasmine decades ago, that being heard wasn't about making sound. It was about finding someone who cared enough to learn your language. The foundation had helped 247 children find their voices again in 18 months. 247 kids who'd arrived silent and left speaking, maybe not with words, maybe not right away, but speaking nonetheless. Founded by Jasmine Floyd with Nelson's memory guiding every Pachacos. Funded by Kong Minho's restitution and reparations. Inspired by Jiwoo Kang's courage to finally break a silence that had nearly killed her. The sun set over the estate, painting the garden in gold and amber. In that light, you couldn't see the blood that had been spilled or the violence that had been committed. You could only see the children playing, the parents hoping, the staff working to prove that cycles of violence could be broken, that silence could be transformed from weapon to Pachacos, that listening, really listening, could change everything. Jasmine stood, taking the new girl's hand, leading her toward the garden where music played and people gathered, and Jiwoo waited with that smile that said she knew, truly knew, what it meant to be heard. The foundation's motto was painted above the entrance in letters 3 feet tall, visible to everyone who entered. Every silence has a reason. Every voice deserves a listener. And in the classroom turned sanctuary, in the garden turned stage, in the mansion turned refuge, that promise was kept.
Daily.
Deliberately. Unstoppably. Because sometimes justice doesn't roar. Sometimes it signs, clearly, carefully, persistently, until the whole world has no choice but to pay attention. And someone finally answers, I see you. I hear you. You matter. That was enough. That was everything.